Hi everyone and welcome to another short tutorial. In this video I would like to give you an example, if you have a bit more budget, how to do high quality vlogging. Which camera I'm using, which selfie stick I'm using, which kind of settings I'm using, which microphone I'm using, and what kind of audio settings I use to record this video in combination with the lens. So first of all, let's start with the camera. At the moment I'm filming myself with my Sony Alpha 7 IV, which is a full frame camera which lets me record in 4K up to 60 frames per second. At the moment I'm recording myself in 4K 25. I can also record myself in 4K 30 or 4K 50. To be honest, I don't see any real reason why I would go for 50 or even 60 frames per second when I vlog myself, apart from the fact that the video looks more fluent if I record myself with 50 or 60 frames per second. The lens I'm using is a 14mm 1.8 G Master lens. As you can see, if I get closer to my head, the background almost disappears from the image. Why is that? Because I'm using a fast aperture here. That is a lens with a maximum aperture of 1.8. That means it lets a lot of light in, and the bigger the camera sensor, the nicer this effect is. So let me give you an example what's gonna happen if I turn down the aperture. So I'm gonna steal some light here from my camera. This is now a 1.8 aperture. If I hold my hands here, as you can see, my face is already blurred out, so is the background. And let me go down with the aperture, so that's 2.8. As you can see, the background comes in a bit more sharp. Then that's an aperture of 4. If you have a lens that only has an aperture of 4, let's say the 20 to 70G, you will get this kind of quality. If I further turn down the aperture, so that's 5.6, that's an aperture of 8, and as you can see, the entire image gets more sharp. So you can see more details here in my face, you can see more details in the background. And if I go down to aperture, let's say f10, the camera pushes the ISO up to 12,800 because I'm stealing a lot of light here from my camera. If I turn in the other direction, as you can see, I can blur out the background. That is important if you would like to film yourself in a city, for instance, and you would like to blur out the faces around you. I would go for a lens with a fast aperture, like this one here, the 14mm 1.8, or even the 20mm 1.8G. The 20mm 1.8G retails at the moment for about 800 to 900 bucks, while this one here, the 14mm, retails at the moment for about 14 or 1500 bucks. The camera at the moment retails for about 2300 euros, while the external microphone, which I'm using here, is also by Sony for about 300 euros, which is, by the way, almost equivalent to US dollar. Then I'm using a selfie stick also by Sony for about 120 bucks, which allows me to take a photo or which allows me to record a video here directly using the finger. It's connected via Bluetooth, so I don't need to push the trigger button or the record button here on this camera in order to film myself or to take a photo of myself. I can use the selfie stick also as a tripod. It's kind of a mini tripod which I can set on my desk to record myself. Let's speak about the settings I'm using. Since I'm recording myself now in 4K 25, I use the double amount of shutter speed, so a 50th of a second. If I record myself now in 4K 30, I would use a 60 of a shutter speed. If I record myself in 4K 50, I would use 100 of a shutter speed in order to get a natural looking movement here on the camera. Since the sun has already set, I'm using a 1.8 aperture. That means a lot of light is passing through that lens on my camera sensor, which means I don't need to push the ISO too far. If I use an aperture of 5.6, of course you see more details here in the background, but the camera needs to push the ISO already to 10,000 instead of 1,000 if I take an aperture of 1.8. So it depends a bit on you, what you want. If you would like to blur out the background, I would either take the 20mm or the 14mm and use a fast aperture like 1.8 or 2.5. And if you would like to get a lot of details also from your background and of course of you, go for an aperture between f4 and 8. Also, that is quite important during daylight, if you have a lot of sun, that you pick an aperture that makes sense for you. However, there is a problem with the 14mm. First of all, it's really hard to put an ND filter on. Of course, you can use one of these click filters, which are super expensive. They look super weird here on this lens. They might be nice for taking pictures, but I would say the better solution in this case would be to take the 20mm with a 67mm ND filter, which isn't too expensive either, to vlog yourself. However, you are a bit closer. Now we come to a downside here of this camera. It's a full frame camera, but this Sony Alpha 7 IV crops into my video if I use a frame rate of 50 or 60 frames per second, which I'll show you now. So as you can see, I'm using the same lens, same camera, same settings, but you see a lot less from the background. And that's because this camera, even it's a full frame camera, it crops in by 1.5 if I use a frame rate in 4K of either 50 or 60 frames per second. I can avoid this by using a lower resolution, like 1080p, it won't crop in, but it's kind of weird that I get the same view here that I would get if I take this lens and put it on an APS-C sensor camera like the Sony Alpha 6700 for instance. 25 frames per second, and as you can see a lot more here from the background. By the way, I switched now the ISO to auto, which gives me a maximum of 12,800, which I depicted from the camera's menu. And yeah, the microphone that I'm using is a one from Sony, which I told you already, for about 300 bucks. If I record audio, I try to set the parameters, so the audio recording level, to approximately -3 to -6 decibels, no matter which microphone I'm using. It does have some really nice features, by the way, so I can decide in which direction I would like to record the audio. First of all, I depicted now the mode that lets me record the audio from front of the camera. I can also use a 360-degree audio recording, and I can also record in both ways. I would like to show you something. I can use the audio from the front and the rear of the microphone. So if someone would stand now in front of my camera, he or she would explain me something, I would get the same audio as you hear now from the back of the camera. So if I would go through the city and I would like to show you, oh, look at this nice sunset over there. It looks so beautiful here with all the covered snow forest. And now I'm just recording the audio which is coming from the front of the camera. So I'm not recording any audio from behind the camera anymore. Let's say you don't have the money to afford this external microphone in order to get a better audio. I have also here a cheap microphone, which is a wireless microphone, which you might see over here. So I got this wind protection attached to this microphone. This is by a company called Comica. There you get a charging case with two different cables, one for your phone, one for the camera. You get two microphones, one receiver, which is now on top of my camera. I set the audio level to approximately 15 here on the Sony camera. And the cool thing about having a wireless microphone is that I can turn this camera in any direction I want. So let's say I would like to show you something, or you would like to film an interview situation, and you're always getting the same audio quality. There's also a different version which I can recommend highly to you, which just came out a few days ago. For approximately 300 bucks. Make sure to check out the link in the video description. So I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial. If you do have any further questions, leave a comment below, make sure to subscribe, and you will find all of the accessories I used to record this video in the link in the video description below. See you next time, und tschüss from this wonderful snowy forest here in the area of Cologne.